So, Acts chapter 15. And while my laptop comes out of sleep mode, I will ask a question. One thing that I really appreciate about our church is that it's so multicultural, and that we have such a diversity of people, and diversity of nationalities, of languages, of races, of what other things, all kinds of other things, age, education, vocation, and we can go on and on and on. The interesting thing about these things that we look at as humans, and we tend to put people in boxes. It's so in our nature, we're so conditioned with it, and it's the world that we grow up in. Sometimes even limits us by these differences. In what way do you think you've been limited by any of these things in your past or present, or by any of these things that the world classify people by, all these boxes that people put it in?
Different countries, mainly.
Different countries, how does that limit us?
Religion, speak, languages, cultures.
Yeah, it limits us. You go to a different country, you're like, oh, I can't understand them and they don't understand me.
I have one girl who speaks 15 different languages, and she's very clever.
Wow.
She gets, because if you go to India, there's 3 different dialects in India, 3 different, if you go to Laos in Thailand, it's different. If you go to different countries, even in England, you can talk Welsh, you can talk Gaelic, you can talk Scottish, even...
Yeah, languages can be limited.
It can be very difficult.
Yes,
and I have one person who speaks 15 different languages.
I'm thinking of growing up as a South African, and not instituting or not starting anti-apartheid or apartheid, but being part of it, and how limited it was and how difficult it was at some stages in my life. So I think that's a good example personally.
Yeah, even now it's the other way around in South Africa, where as a white person there's affirmative action and quotas, and if you want to go and study medicine and you're white, there's only 10% of medical students are allowed to be white. So it's sort of in reverse now. It's, if you want to go to some countries, they say, no, you can't come, you need a visa. Or if you go to North Korea, they say, no, you can't come, not even if you have a visa. So in all kinds of ways, the world we live in likes to make differences and distinguish in all kinds of different ways. When I was in Amsterdam, the organisation that Leavesden worked at, the Royal Tropical Institute, it's an international organisation, and one of their divisions deal with, they call it intercultural professionals. And what they do is they work with companies and organisations to train them with intercultural communication and intercultural work. So, for example, if a large multinational company send their staff overseas, they would give them some training. And so I got involved in that, and I would do a 1-day or a 2-day workshop on training people how to deal with going to a completely different culture. And there's sort of a generic module to it, and then one part of it is country specific. And I say, well, now, when you go to South Africa, this is what you will find is different. And how do you deal with that? So, like, for example, time is different in South Africa. If in England, if you say, I'll see you soon, how soon would you reckon that would be?
Never.
Tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Half an hour.
Half an hour.
Depends on who said it.
Depends on the context, depends on saying
Or
it.
it's the same day maybe.
I'll see you now in England. What would that mean? Now, like within 10 minutes, 15 minutes? An hour?
Yeah.
Right now, yeah. But not more than 15 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
So if in Africa, if you say, I'll see you now,
They might not
well, it means hopefully before the sun sets.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. So when we lived in Namibia, there's a saying in in the West, there's a saying that says, don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. So in Namibia, we used to say, don't put off until tomorrow what you can put off until next week. And sometimes we find these things funny, and sometimes we find them irritating, and sometimes it's so deeply rooted within us that we think it's a matter of right and wrong. It's like, no, that's wrong. It shouldn't be like that. Because it's so ingrained in us. And it can be something, can be something completely misunderstood sometimes as well, just because of culture and language. Like, in England, if I say, oh, the turkey is ready to eat, what would that mean to you?
Come to the table.
Come to the table, yes. Yeah. The dinner is ready. And if in England I say, oh, the dog is ready to eat.
What? Vietnam.
Yeah, but in England you would say,
oh, interesting.
The dog's hungry, he wants to eat now. If I go to Asia and I say the dog is ready to eat, what will that mean? Something completely different now. It's like, oh, we're going to have the dog now. Dinner is ready. Sorry, Oscar. Close your ears. But it's interesting how these differences can sometimes become so important to us that it can upset us and it can bring us even into dispute. And that's what we're going to look at today as we turn to Acts 15. And I think one thing that's helpful to understand before we read this is that we read a bit here about two cities, Antioch and Jerusalem. Now, what do we know about? Does anybody know about Antioch and Jerusalem? What do we know about these two cities? Anybody know? What do we know about Jerusalem?
I know about Antioch, the Christians were called disciples first in Antioch.
Right, yes, that happened in Antioch, yeah. That's where they're called Christians first. They were called disciples before that. Okay. Yeah, what else do we know? Where are these two cities? Where's Jerusalem? It's in Israel, yeah. I mean, Jerusalem is where the temple is. It's very, very much the heart, the holy city, the heart of Judaism. It's the heart of the Israelite kingdom. And Antioch is in Syria, modern day Syria. And today it's a Muslim country, but in the time of the Bible, Antioch was very much a pagan city. It was filled with Gentiles. So two very different cultures, two very different nations. And that's helpful to understand that when we read this. So if we go to Acts 15, and we start reading here. So, just to give the context, Acts 14 was the end of Paul's first missionary journey. And we went through a few chapters, how we went, he did that big circle, the tour, he went to the island, and then through Asia Minor, did his circle route, and then came back to Antioch. And this is where it began. So Paul is back in Antioch, he's teaching the church there, and this is where we pick up the story. So in Acts 15 verse 1, certain people came down from Judea to Antioch, so from Jerusalem basically, or from that area around Jerusalem, and they were teaching the believers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved. This brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. So Paul and Barnabas were appointed, along with some other believers, to go up to Jerusalem to see the apostles and elders about this question. Okay, let's just pause there for a moment. So what happened here? Why was there this big dispute going on suddenly in the church? What was the big argument about?
Well, salvation.
It was about salvation.
How to be saved.
Yes, how to be saved. Is this an important issue? It's very much important.
Sure.
What if these people came from Judea and they said, look, you need to wear white robes in church because that's the right way to do it.
That's what I do.
That was cultural thing.
That would have been a cultural
Trying
thing.
to bring it up.
What if they said you have to wear white robes to be saved?
Oh.
You still wouldn't know.
That's a different thing. So this became a very big issue, not only because of the fact that they they said, oh, according to the custom taught by Moses, but because they made this a salvation issue. And the question is, what is worth disputing about, even for us as Christians? There's a lot of division in churches even nowadays. Walk around London and you can find how many churches, how many different churches, and they're all different in some way or another. What are some of the things that distinguish churches today? You will say, oh, this church is like this and this church is like that. That makes them different.
Speaking in tongues.
Speaking in tongues, yeah, that's one thing. So some would say, oh, we speak in tongues, and others say we don't.
Infant baptism.
Infant baptism. Some say, oh, we christen babies, we baptize babies. Some say, no, we get baptized as an adult.
Well, those processions with even young kids, they are trained for confession, something, mass, things like that.
For confirmation, yeah, confirmation. Some have confirmation when you reach your teenage years, and some don't. What else?
Different practices.
Different practices around baptism.
Papalship.
Pardon?
Papalship, or the leadership.
The leader, oh, that's a bit, yeah. Some say no, the Pope is the leader of the church, and some don't acknowledge the Pope. They say no, we have local leadership. So the Presbyterian Church came out of that. They said no, we are led by elders. Presbyter is the Greek in the Bible for elder. So we are led by elders and not by the Pope.
Different views on
Leadership.
marriages and divorces.
Sure.
Marriage and divorce, yes. Are you allowed to divorce in the church? Are you allowed to remarry if you've been divorced? Are you allowed to marry somewhere outside the church?
Male and female
Yeah.
rules,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Roles, yes. Are women allowed to speak in the church or not? Are they allowed to
But also
preach
like head
or not?
coverings and things like that. So in some churches, women have to have their head covered.
Head covers, yeah, all kinds of things that
Singing practices.
Yeah, worship.
singing,
Worship.
instruments or no instruments.
Yeah.
When Liz and I started dating, we're both from Protestant Calvinist churches. The church that she was in and the church that I was in, before our time, about 50 years before us, was one church, and then they split because of about 4 or 5 reasons. But one of them was that our church adopted small cups for communion, and their church said, no, we must have one cup that everybody shares and gets passed around.
Okay.
So, did Paul and Barnabas, so what happened in the church here is this teaching came in, and they came into this dispute. Would the easiest solution not just have been to say, okay guys, let's just split them? Why don't you guys, we'll make 2 churches. We'll make the circumcision church and the not circumcision church. Isn't that the easiest solution?
No, not in that case.
Not in that case.
No.
Wouldn't that have been easier? I'm not asking is that the correct solution, but would it have been the easiest
It would have been
solution?
easier. I think it would have been easier.
Why do you disagree, Stella?
Well, because I know Paul, because I'm sure he was reminded how he was saved and that encounter with Jesus. He was saying, never. There's no salvation what you talk about,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
would say, on the right ground.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So for Paul, it would not have been easy.
And also, splits hadn't happened before in the church. It's one of those things, when it first happens, it becomes easier.
Right.
The first time.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, it's like the solution is to disregard divorce. If you know somebody who's divorced, you're more likely to get divorced yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, it's almost like a contagion.
That is a very good point. Yeah, this could have led to the first split in the church, and so it may have been a solution to say, okay, let's just go our own separate ways, and there was definitely a possibility and a threat at the time. But what they did is they said, no, we can't just separate. We can't just take the easy way out. How would we apply this to our own just personal lives today? Have you ever had conflict with anybody?
Yeah.
You don't have to answer that as a public, but I appreciate your openness.
See, I've got gay friends and lesbian friends, and some churches won't accept it. I've actually got a gay friend who's a priest.
Right. Yeah, so that's another
My
dispute.
brother is actually married to a doctor.
Right.
He's gay.
Right. So that's another one of those.
It's very
disputable
embarrassing for
matters.
some people.
Right.
My own family will arguing over this.
Right.
Very hard. I have gay friends, I've got a friend who will not even work with them. He can't even work with them. He won't even talk to them.
Right.
This is very embarrassing
Yeah.
because he's a good friend of mine.
Right. So
But he will not work with them. It
Right.
causes big problems.
it causes big problems. So
Churches, there's rows between gay marriages. Now, in this country, we've accepted gay marriages.
yeah.
Other countries, you will be stoned to death. In a Muslim country, you will be executed.
Yeah.
You will
Again,
be
there's
killed.
huge differences.
They won't accept it
different places.
In the Philippines, you can't even get a job if you're gay or lesbians. They won't accept it. This
Right.
is wrong.
Right. So in our personal lives, when we're faced with situations like this, when disputes and debates, even for ourselves, we can say, well, what's the easy way out? It's like, let's just go our separate ways. But what did Paul and Barnabas and the church do? They said, no, we can't just do that. We have to work through this. We have to deal with this. We have to wrestle with it. We cannot just say, let's just walk away. And that's one of the hardest things with conflict is sometimes we just agree to disagree. It's like, oh, okay, fine. You go your way, I'll go my way. And we never resolve the actual issue. We never work through it and deal with it and say, what we're actually trying to achieve here is unity. And so they said, no, we need to resolve this. Because this is so foundational, especially this matter which was about salvation, is that we do need to work this out because we don't want to break the unity of Christ, the unity of the body. So they resolved they're going to send them to Jerusalem to see the apostles and the elders about this question. So we carry on in verse 3. So the church sent them on their way as they travelled, and as they travelled through Phoenicia and Samaria, they told how the Gentiles had been converted. This news made all the believers very glad. Now, interesting, Phoenicia and Samaria are both also Gentile areas. What did they not share, or at least it's not mentioned here? What did Paul and Barnabas, as they travelled through here, what did they not share as they travelled through these regions? What did they not tell them about?
The dispute.
The dispute,
They keep quiet about it.
They kept quiet about it, which I think is a good lesson. It's like, hang on, this is not going to be encouraging. It's got nothing to do with them. What we can share with them is good news that will encourage them, that will, and it did. It made the believers very glad. So it's just an interesting little side note. So it made all the believers very glad. We carry on in verse 4.
It's interesting that, sorry, just to,
Yeah.
it's interesting that they didn't say so at the time, but obviously we know about it because it's in the Bible.
Yes.
So it's not like it's, I think, it's quite easy to get very, I hate it. I don't think they hate it at all, we know about it, but it wasn't poured over and focused on.
Indeed, it wasn't focused on, yes. It wasn't like this is the primary message. Oh, we've got some, there's this mess going on in Antioch and, it's like in...
It was in, we never know about it in the Bible.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, that's a good point. It's, So in verse 4, when they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and the elders, to whom they reported everything God had done through them. So again, they shared good news as well. It's not only about, there's this issue. It's always helpful to keep perspective and to not just focus on the conflict and the negative issue and the thing that is being disputed. So verse 5, then some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up and said, the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to keep the law of Moses. So in verse 6, the apostles and the elders met to consider this question. So how did they start to deal with this dispute?
Well, they met with the leaders of the church to discuss it.
Right.
Presumably in a calm way.
Yeah, presumably. We hope so, yes. It doesn't say so, but it also doesn't say that it didn't.
Well, it started off with the Jews first of all, though.
Pardon?
The Jews talked to other beliefs, and that's how it actually started. I was told it was actually taught by Jewish religion, the circumcised, and then it went on to all over different places in the world.
That's right. Yeah, it was Jewish. So for a Jew to be a Jew, you have to be circumcised. So under the old covenant, before Christianity, that was the sign of salvation, that you're part of God's people, is circumcision.
Yeah.
But with Christ, that law was scrapped. The law of Moses was fulfilled when Jesus died on the cross. And then Jesus introduced baptism as the way of salvation rather than circumcision. But the Jews, so this is where the cultural difference comes in. That's what they were raised with. That's what they were taught from when they were little children. So it was very hard for them to, from the outside we can look at this and it's so easy to judge someone else. It's like, can't they just get it? I mean, isn't it so simple? It's much easier to just get baptized. Why do you want to hang on to this old thing?
The same with Jews. When you die, you're born with no clothes on, and when you die as a Jew, they take all your clothes off and you're put in a coffin, buried with no clothes on. And it still goes on to this day.
Okay. Yeah. So
well, it's very unusual.
For us, it's unusual.
And that's their rules and regulations. I went to a Jewish, same as a Jewish wedding. It's very rare. So they have their own beliefs, and you cannot change them.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it cannot change it, but I think it's always helpful for us to understand that sometimes we look at those things like, wow, why is it so hard to change? Like, oh, they're so stuck in their ways. But if we think about ourselves, do you have ways that we are stuck in, that we find hard to change? Or think like, it's just the way, Any thoughts? Simon, you want to share something? Or?
No, I was even thinking this week how, we're all kind of quite stubborn, and, we all like our things, don't we, and sins and whatever, so...
Yeah,
I was likening it with Emma actually. I just said it's like the old man who won't give up his old mattress, no matter how disgusting it is.
Let's go back. Like when I was born, my parents were so strict. Even to this day, you can't change. Like anywhere I go, you take your shoes off. I hate it. I will not have any cigarettes in my house. I've never bought cigarettes in my house. I refuse. My daughter-in-law smokes. I throw her out of the house.
Right.
I cannot stand. Like now we've changed to like going into a pub. You can't smoke. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't gamble. I hate football. But I love martial arts. I like hurting people. But that's my job. But it's weird. You cannot change. It's weird at my age now, being brought up by my parents, right? The first thing you do when you go into anybody's house, to this day, you take your shoes off. I can't stop it. You just automatically do it. And the people look at me and, they say, Paul, you don't have to take your shoes off. It's just, I cannot stop it.
Yes.
It's been brought into me, right, and you cannot, put your shoes on.
Right.
It's something you just cannot change.
Right.
Yeah,
so it's, and I think the interesting thing is, yes, Anita.
I was just thinking of this, of the scripture saying that when someone comes to Christ, they become a new creature.
Yes.
So to me, it was to leave behind stuff. It wasn't easy, but then I realized how easy it is to be new.
Yes.
And how easy you can move through things when you are flexible. So you show love actually to someone else if you give up on your ways.
Yeah.
Make room for.
Yeah.
Oh really? Is that easy? Oh yeah. Oh it is. So to me, it was this process of peeling off. Peeling off and then become.
That's a very good point. Yes,
getting into
Leon.
And what you're saying is really interesting. I was listening to a radio program on the way home last night, and it was an interview with a Syrian refugee. She's a microbiologist, in Syria, but she came over here, she had nothing, she had absolutely nothing, and she's actually now making award-winning cheeses in Yorkshire. And one of the things she said in the interview, she said, well, when you're in a brand new situation, everything is new. It's easy to become something new. It's easy, you know, because everything is possible. You know, everything, you got nothing. Everything you had was completely irrelevant. But now you're in a completely. You have to sort of swim, but it means everything is possible. So it's like, you know, as you're saying, when you got something new, like when you become a Christian, that's kind of that's what we're saying. Very true. What was the last one?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I think when Jesus said, "If you want to come after me, anyone who wants to follow me must give up everything." And sometimes we think about, it's physical things we need to give up, or it's our sins we need to give up, but it's really our whole identity actually we need to give up and say, no, but I am adopting a completely new identity, a new way of life, and what seems impossible becomes possible. That change, that transformation that happens in the water of baptism is almost amazing. It's like, wow, you've changed so much. And sometimes we don't even know it. It was amazing for me. There was a company I worked at in South Africa before I became a Christian. Then I left the company, did some other work, became a Christian, and then I went back to that company. And 2 or 3 people there said, wow, you've really changed. I'm like, really, did I? One of them said, yeah, you used to be so arrogant. I'm like, now you tell me. You never told me that. But of course, in becoming a Christian, I realized how arrogant I was. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so prideful and arrogant. Wow. It was encouraging to know that, to hear from others that they saw that that changed. But I think the lesson, what we see here is that it's so easy from outside the situation to cast a judgment on someone who struggles to change, or someone who's stuck in a certain way, when we see it a different way. Like, why can't they just think like I do? And one of the things I teach in that course, in the intercultural communication, and we see it throughout the Bible, is that we need to start from a point of curiosity almost, to try and understand someone else and understand why they think why they do, and put ourselves in their shoes before we get into the dispute of right and wrong, and I'm right and you're wrong. And what I appreciate about the church in Jerusalem, they could easily have said they were all Jews. They were all raised in that society. And even they struggled with this. God had to appear to Peter in a vision and show him this vision of all the animals and tell him to eat. Even after he became a Christian, he struggled with it. Even later, when Peter went to Antioch, we read later on in Acts, and we read it in Galatians. We read Peter went to Antioch, and then Paul got into a dispute and said, Peter, you came to Antioch, and you went and you sat with the Jews, and you wouldn't eat with the Gentiles. It was hard for him. It was hard to even for him as an apostle in the church. Yet they met together and they said, let's discuss this. Let's come up with a solution. How can we resolve this in a way that keeps the church together? So in verse 7, we read, after much discussion, no quick conclusions, much discussion, Peter got up and addressed them. Brothers, you know that some time ago God made a choice among you that the Gentiles might hear from my lips the message of the gospel and believe. So that's when he went to what's his name? To the Gentiles. Cornelius. When he went to Cornelius. Cornelius. Verse 8, God, who knows the heart, showed that he accepted them by giving the Holy Spirit to them just as he did to us. He did not discriminate between us and them, for he purified their hearts by faith. Now then, why do you try to test God by putting on the necks of Gentiles a yoke that neither we nor our ancestors have been able to bear? No, we believe it is through the grace of our Lord Jesus that we are saved, just as they are. So Peter brings an interesting perspective. He reminds them that, hang on, this is a new deal. The gospel is different from what the law was. And we know that God has has made salvation available to all people now. He says, but hang on, you yourselves know that this law of Moses is a heavy burden to bear. Why do you want to now make it heavy for others as well? And he reminds them about the new covenant of grace and salvation through grace rather than through the law. So then Paul and Barnabas speaks and everybody listens to them, and in verse 13, when they finished, James spoke up. James is another one of the apostles, one of the leaders. And then he says, brothers, he said to listen to me, and we skip to verse 19. In verse 19, James concludes with a proposal. So James says, it is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Now, this is interesting. Even when we people, or when we think about our Christianity, do we think it's a difficult thing? Do we sometimes make it difficult? Do we sometimes make it difficult for ourselves? And in what way do we do that?
Seems like holding on our old stuff,
Holding on to old stuff, yeah?
not being willing to take an excuse or something. Not
Yeah.
to,
That's one way.
mm.
Any other thoughts?
I think we sometimes also maybe make it difficult for people by putting restrictions or maybe traditions that we think they should do first. That perhaps, like in this situation, are not. Salvation things are just the way that we like to do things.
Yes.
We make it difficult
Yeah.
to people by saying that they have to do that first.
Yeah.
So it's,
Mm.
yeah. I don't want to bring up examples, but yeah.
You don't want to bring up
understand.
examples, yes.
Yeah.
But you can probably all think of examples.
Yeah.
And some of them are borderline, and some of them are clear.
Yeah.
Some of them like, really? It's like, I know in my early days as a Christian, there was no way anybody would be baptized if they haven't been to church.
Yeah.
It's like, no. They need to
And a
come to
certain
church
number
a certain
of
number of
services,
times before you can baptize.
No matter if they were an ER
But even
doctor
now,
or
if you're getting married
nurse.
to church,
You couldn't even get
you
married.
have to attend that church ceremony
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
before they'll marry you.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
So now we can discuss the details a lot, like they did do, wrestle
Yeah.
through it.
So they want to.
Simon?
I think it's important when you're sharing your faith with people not to share too much religion, you know, and lots of kind of rules and everything like that. It's not.
Yeah.
I think that some of those obviously they're important, you know, but it's not what Jesus is trying to. Jesus wants to reach out to people, love them, you know. I think that's the most important.
That's a very good point, and that's what James is trying to say. It's like, hang on, let's not miss the message of the grace of God, which is the gospel, the good news, by making it hard for people. And you have to do this, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and only then. It's like, but then it's not grace anymore. Then it's not. We missed the whole point here. So he said, no, let's not make it difficult. So in verse 20, he makes a proposal. It's like, how can we solve this? So he said, well, okay, let's not even talk about this issue of circumcision. But he says in verse 20, instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. For the law of Moses has been preached in every city from the earliest times and is read in the synagogues on every Sabbath. Now we're going to have to dig a bit deeper here, because this is quite interesting. Why do you think he switched from the issue of circumcision to saying, but hang on, let's tell them this?
Well, I mean, when a bit earlier saying that this is back in verse 10, it says, now then, why do you try to test God by putting on the necks of the disciples a yoke that neither we nor our forefathers have been able to bear? So that was they talked about the bigger issues around, the circumcision is almost like a proxy about the bigger, following the law and what that means.
Yeah.
And that's obviously what they discussed. It's like, well, how, the law is not working, hasn't worked,
Yeah.
it's been fulfilled. What's what is the kind of what useful things can we give people to help them in their faith.
Right.
So that sounds like a discussion they had.
Yeah, it's useful things to help them in their faith. Circumcision is a very clear dividing line. You either are or you're not.
Yeah.
These things are more like, you can abstain from them. Maybe you did it in the past, but now you don't do it anymore. And it's not like you are not. You know, it's I used to, eat food polluted by idols, but now I don't anymore. Oh, okay, we can accept that. It's not such a clear dividing line.
And they're all more linked to living out your faith, isn't it? So you're not going to go and sit with people who are worshipping idols and eat the food with them. You're not going to go and be immoral because of your faith in God and your obedience to God. So it's more linked. Circumcision, on the other hand, I suppose is a traditional act, I suppose, that just sets you apart, not necessarily like those ones.
So two important things here. So he shifted the discussion from doctrine to life. So let's focus on the faithful life. Let's focus on how you really live your life rather than making the doctrine the issue. And so often this happens when disputes arise, is that because everybody wants to be right. And doctrine it's easier to say I'm right about doctrine than to say I'm right about my life. Because when it's about your life, it's like, okay, hang on.
The conscience steps in.
Let me not pick up the first stone here because I'm going to get some stones coming back at me. So it almost pushes us into a position of humility, and it's like, okay, hang on. Now it's about me, not just about some intellectual topic that we have a dispute about. So he shifted it from doctrine to life and said, this is what it's really about, is how we live our lives. The other thing, why does he mention the law of Moses? And you just touched on it. He says, for the law of Moses has been preached in all the cities and it's read in the synagogues on every Sabbath. Why is he saying this? Why is he bringing these things into? Now think back to the two cultures that we have here. In a pagan city, what was the culture? What would the culture have been like? In a city like Antioch. Does anybody know a bit about that Roman Greek culture?
Well, there'll be lots of temples.
Lots of temples.
Lots of sacrifices.
Lots of sacrifices.
Different sort of...
High sexual immorality, temple prostitutes.
The opposite of this.
The opposite of Jerusalem. A different kind of temple. So, and what's the law of Moses say about clean and unclean, and how the Jews are associated? Who are you allowed to associate with? You said sit down with.
Only the clean.
Only the clean. So the problem that the Jews had is that every Sunday you hear, be pure, be clean, and you cannot sit down and eat with someone who was sexually immoral. You cannot sit down and eat with someone who just had not kosher food. So James also shifted not only from life, but he said, what's the real issue here? The issue is unity in the church. And let's focus on the things that will allow the Jews and the Gentiles to have communion together. And for the Jews, if they know that, these guys, they didn't go to the Greek temple yesterday, they didn't eat any of that food, they abstained from sexual immorality and from the meat of strangled animals and from blood, it's like, we can have a communion meal together. So he shifted the whole focus from doctrine to not only life, but also life together in the church. They said, let's think about the things that separate us and see if we can deal with that and say, can we have a communal meal together? Can we sit down and have communion and be united and unified as a church? And that is why he switched the focus and why he said, let's make these rules. Let's send them these rules. And as we carry on, we're not going to read all of it. They actually agreed on that, and they said, let's send them this letter, and they did that. They sent them the letter, and the letter was delivered, and in verse 30, we read that, so the men were sent off, and they went down to Antioch, where they gathered the church together, and they delivered the letter. The people read it, and they were glad for its encouraging message. Why do you think the Gentiles found this message encouraging?
Well, they didn't have to get circumcised.
Yes. So it's like, okay, don't have to get circumcised, we got that out of the way. My baptism is valid, I'm still saved. So, yes,
I think they felt understood.
they felt understood.
You know, that's so important.
I think they realised that there was going to be unity. I think really
Yeah.
that they were accepted
Yeah,
in their beliefs and things like that. that
Right.
They were accepted as part of
the
their
community,
community.
Yeah.
right? And why did they not find it as a burden to be told, oh, don't commit sexual immorality, don't eat food sacrificed to idols?
It's kind of common sense, and it's giving authority to things they probably didn't want to do anyway.
Exactly. If they were converted to become
Yeah.
Christians, they probably gave that up already.
Yeah.
So it's like,
It was a
oh,
chain of-
okay, well, I'm not doing that anyway, so yeah, I'm happy about that. That's easy, I can do that. I mean, I stopped doing that when I became a Christian, so I just keep on stop doing it.
I think this was actually like a relief, you know, like confirming their new identity.
Yeah, it's a confirmation. It's like, okay. No, I'm okay. I'm still saved. I'm in the grace of God.
It's very interesting because in verse 10 it's all about the yoke, and you're being yoked with this hard stuff.
Yeah.
This Paul is like the yoke is easy and the burden is light.
Exactly,
That's
yeah.
what Jesus was saying back
Yeah.
in the Gospels.
Yes, Anita.
Yeah, the reason, so I'm reading the Message version of the Bible, and after you read the stuff with the letter coming in, they say here, then it was time to go home. They were sent off by their new friends with laughter and embraces. All around to report back to those who had sent them. So all this good news, you say, oh,
Right.
believe and be pleased, and now everyone was, woohoo, let me give you a hug and whoo.
Yeah, they left off. Everybody was. It was not like, okay, fine, okay, we'll agree to disagree. We'll agree that okay, that's the way. Like, okay, yeah, that's a good solution.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. I love the message. I like the message translation. I wouldn't base any major doctrine on it, but but it makes the Bible come alive in application, especially. So, what can we learn from our personal lives? Do you think from this whole approach and from what the way they addressed this in the church in Antioch and Jerusalem? Any thoughts?
I think sometimes you can be uncertain about something, you don't ask about it. So I think this is a great message to say, ask about it, because the answer may not be as bad as you think.
That's a good point, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Any other thoughts?
I think to be open-minded, you know, that we don't know everything, we don't have all the answers, but we can still learn and grow, you know, we shouldn't stagnate and think we have arrived.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for myself, I think like in being right and wrong is not only about the teaching. I love teaching. For me, it's like I really love doctrine, love sound doctrine. But then it's like hang on, your life is what really matters to God as well. They're both important.
Yeah.
Doctrine is a salvation issue, but it can be a distraction as well. And then it's like hang on, this is about how do I live my life. That's really what unites us more than the doctrine. Is sharing a common life together. I mean, how often do we talk about doctrine in church? It's not like we share our lives more than we share about doctrine. It's like, doctrine, okay, we agree on that, but it's sharing our lives. That's what really is what brings us together, what keeps us together. It's the fellowship we have. It is rooted in Christ, it's rooted in doctrine, but it's rooted in sharing a common lifestyle, a common way of life, and agreeing on boundaries where, yes, we all agree that this is the way we live our lives, and that we can have communion meals together. So as we're going to have communion now, let's reflect on some thoughts of gratitude about the barriers that were broken down by Christ, so that an Englishman and a South African and a dark skin and a light skin and an in-between skin and a blonde and a dark hair and a Afrikaans speaker and an English speaker and a Romanian speaker and we can carry on and on and on. Can have a meal of unity. Let's thank Christ for that, and it's possible because of Christ dying on the cross and uniting us all and forgiving us so that we can become part of the church and the Master's community. Let's pray for the day.